Okay, let's just get right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack one of the absolute most frustrating paradoxes of human behavior. I'm talking about putting off the exact goals we genuinely care about achieving. Listen, if you're a focused learner who values your time, you have definitely hit this wall before. You've got this project, a goal, some big dream that you truly care about. Yet somehow, out of nowhere, you find yourself deciding that right this very second is the absolute perfect time to reorganize your spice rack or deep clean your baseboards.
Seriously, let that sink in for a second. Why do we do this? You know exactly what you need to do. You genuinely want the final result, but instead of sitting down and writing that book or finishing that presentation, you open YouTube. Then you check your phone. Then suddenly you absolutely need a snack. Before you know it, you're clearing out your inbox, hours have vanished, and you haven't made an inch of progress. So why can't you just start?
Well, the easiest, most common explanation we all jump to is the lazy lie. We just assume procrastination equals poor discipline, and we slap that lazy label right onto our own foreheads. But honestly, that label does nothing but add a massive layer of shame to the whole problem. It makes you blame yourself, which, ironically, makes the task feel even more unbearable. But psychology gives us a much more fascinating and honestly infinitely more useful explanation than just deciding you lack willpower.
When I was digging into the data on this, the sheer scale of the research completely blew my mind. 28,019. That is the number of participants in a monumental 2026 meta-analysis. We're talking 64 independent studies and 155 effect sizes all rolled into one. And this data completely shatters the laziness myth. What this exhaustive research proved is that the quality of your motivation matters way more than just having strict discipline. Simply put, not all motivation is built the same.
Think about two people tackling the exact same task. Let's say they're both learning to play the guitar. From the outside, the action looks identical. But inside their heads, completely different worlds. One person is coming at it with an I want to mindset. They chose this. It's theirs. The other person is driven entirely by an I have to mindset. Maybe their parents are forcing them, or they're terrified of falling behind their friends. Even though they're doing the exact same thing, their likelihood of actually procrastinating is night and day.
And this brings us to a crucial concept, autonomous motivation. It's exactly what it sounds like. Motivation where a goal feels personally chosen, deeply meaningful, and completely intrinsic to who you are. The 2026 data explicitly links this kind of autonomous motivation with significantly less maladaptive delay. In other words, the core reason behind why you're doing something literally rewires your brain's likelihood to take action. On the flip side, if your motivation is controlled by outside pressure or a feeling of obligation, well, you're practically guaranteed to delay it.
This difference in motivation creates a really wild disconnect in our brains. It's totally possible to genuinely crave the outcome, like getting fit or landing that big promotion, while viscerally rejecting the uncomfortable immediate actions required to actually get there. Your brain isn't just looking at the finish line, it is actively judging the journey. It's sitting there going, yes, I absolutely want the result, but I really don't want to deal with the friction of doing the work right now.
Which leads us straight into a nasty little trap called the avoidance loop. When you face that initial task discomfort, your brain instinctively looks for an escape hatch. You avoid the task by grabbing your phone, and boom, immediate relief. You get this tiny, sweet psychological payoff. But you know as well as I do, that relief is incredibly short-lived. Hours later, the deadline is breathing down your neck, the stress comes rushing back, and the growing guilt makes that original discomfort feel exponentially worse. It's a self-reinforcing trap where the instant gratification of a screen almost always wins out over the delayed payoff of success.
So how do we break out of this? First, you have to flip your internal script. Stop asking, why am I so lazy? And start asking yourself, what exactly am I avoiding here? Seriously, when you're sitting in front of a blank document and your mind is just begging for a distraction, what is the core feeling you're running away from? Is it the fear that your work won't be good enough? Are you just dreading the mind-numbing boredom of a massive spreadsheet? Or are you crushing under the weight of someone else's expectations?
Identifying what you are avoiding is a massive step. But I have to be clear, and that 2026 meta-analysis warns us about this. Procrastination is not a single cause issue. You can't just flip a magical I choose this switch in your brain and expect your procrastination to disappear overnight. It's a multi-layered beast. Motivation is absolutely key, but it's just one piece of the puzzle. Your underlying emotions, your physical environment, and your deeply ingrained habits all play massive roles in this complex system.
Let's zoom in on that environment piece for a second, because this is huge. A 2026 study published in Scientific Reports took a hard look at digital disconnection as a strategy for self-regulation. And what they found is beautifully simple, and honestly, a huge relief if you've ever lost an entire evening to doom scrolling.
They found that self-control isn't about transforming into this impossibly disciplined superhero who can just ignore a glowing screen. It's all about environment design. Physically putting your phone in another room on Do Not Disturb is profoundly more effective than burning through your precious willpower trying not to look at it.
And your physical environment is directly tied to your habits. There's a fascinating 2025 paper in Nature Human Behavior showing that habits involve completely separable processes for preparing versus initiating a response. Basically, your environment quietly whispers to your brain what it should do next. If sitting at your desk is the cue that automatically makes you grab your phone, well, you're stuck in a habitual loop. But you can completely override this automatic response by changing the cue. Change what happens the split second before the behavior. Make it a rigid, non-negotiable rule. Sit at desk, immediately open document.
Okay, but what if the document is open and the task still feels totally overwhelming? That's when you shrink the start. Initiating a task is always the point of highest psychological friction. Your brain looks at a goal like write 10,000 words and it literally freezes in panic. But if you just give yourself permission to work for 2 minutes, not to finish, just to begin, you drastically lower that barrier to entry. Shrinking the starting line to an embarrassingly easy first step bypasses that friction entirely. It completely changes the dynamic.
To really lock this in, we can look at some incredible planning research from the 2025 Annual Review of Psychology. They highlight the sheer power of implementation intentions, which is just a fancy academic way of saying if-then planning. You see, vague plans like I'll work on it later almost always crash and burn because they leave way too much wiggle room for avoidance. You bypass that by setting a hyper-specific behavioral rule. For example, if it is 8 p.m. and the kids are asleep, then I will immediately open my laptop. It completely removes the burden of having to make a decision in the moment.
So let's pull all of this together. Escaping the procrastination trap is not about having superhuman discipline. It is about building better systems. First, you find the personal meaning in the task, so your motivation is autonomous. Second, you hack your environment to ruthlessly eliminate distractions. Third, you shrink the start, so taking that very first step takes almost zero effort. And finally, you use if-then plans to lock the whole thing down. Your motivation doesn't have to do all the heavy lifting if your systems naturally reduce the friction of acting.
As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge. The very next time you find yourself dragging your feet and delaying a task, I want you to just pause and ask yourself, what makes starting so uncomfortable right now? Do you honestly not want the goal itself, or is it simply that you just don't want to feel the temporary discomfort of starting? Figuring out the difference between those two things, that's half the battle right there.
And that leads perfectly to our final most empowering question. How can you make starting easier? The goal of everything we've talked about today isn't to magically turn you into a robot who never ever procrastinates again. It's to help you stop relying on brute force willpower. Redesign your approach, tweak your environment, and build habits so that simply starting the work becomes easier than the anxiety of avoiding it. Remember, you don't always need more motivation. Sometimes you just need a little less friction.